Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called The Florist of Seville. Thank you, and good luck on your date. Brad held back what he wanted to say until the door closed behind the customer. Ding! Florida woman beats man senseless with bouquet of carnations. What was it about roses and carnations anyway? Sure, they were widely accepted as a sign of love, and it was traditional to give them to someone you loved. But there were other flowers out there that meant so much more. Chrysanthemum meant love, and so did aster. Baby's breath stood for everlasting love, and the jackass that had just left had bought yellow carnations, a flower that meant rejection. Brad took a deep breath and reminded himself that people in Florida were not the brightest crayons in the box. He didn't want that for himself and worked hard to get his scholarship to University of Florida. He had intended to attend UC Davis, but his parents wanted him to stay home. The compromise was the 2-hour commute to Gainesville and back every day, but he graduated near the head of his class with a degree in botany. His parents were so proud that they had even bought him a greenhouse which turned into... Ding! Welcome to the Florist of Seville. Looking for anything in particular?
My wife's birthday is coming up, and I really want to get her something sweet,
the customer said, looking around. Lily of the Valley, Brad suggested.
Here it is, bittersweet,
the customer said joyfully. Brad was disappointed, but bittersweet meant truth. $11.99, Brad said, still trying to find faith in humanity. She loves bittersweet chocolate, and I thought you might like it, the customer said, digging $12 out of his pocket. Keep the change, he said while leaving. Ding. Florida man kills wife with birthday present. Brad sighed and decided to close early to engage in his other favorite pastime. He flipped the sign to Gone Fishing and began to sweep and mop the floors. After he cleaned and watered and fed his darling plants in the greenhouse and made sure they were all happy, before grabbing his tackle box and heading out to his favorite spot at Lake George. Most people would head south to Bakersburg, but then west to the fishing pier. But Brad preferred the quiet serenity that could be found on the south side of the Hog Island near Georgetown. Cracking his first beer, he took a long sip before opening his tackle box and trying to decide if he wanted to go after reddear, striper, or largemouth. His boat rocked gently on the lake as he picked and prodded for a lure that had been successful with reddear, then attached it to his line and cast it in the water and took another long pull from his spear to allow the lure to sink a bit. His line went taut before he could finish the beer, and his fisherman's instincts went into high gear before he noticed the can had fallen out of the boat and started to drift towards the island. Brad had a dilemma. He had a fish on and was putting up a good fight, but if the can washed up on shore and someone found it, he could lose his fishing spot. It didn't take much time to decide to go after the beer can after he reeled in the fish and focused on dinner first, and then pick up the wayward beer. Fate, being a bitch that it is, decided to have a laugh at his expense as his line snapped with such force that he ended up falling backwards out of the boat. Well, Feck, Brad said before climbing back into the boat and heading after the castaway can. The sun was steadily falling over the central Florida woods when Brad found a good place to come ashore and look for his wayward beer. He sloshed his way along the coast in dimming light until he spotted the wayward bud bobbing against the root and went to grab it. The root retracted like a snake, and he heard a piercing scream. There, just to his right, was something that he had never expected to see. He easily identified it as a Torrenia, though much larger than he had ever seen, and it seemed to be trying to hide from him behind the trees. Plants don't move, he thought to himself. He tried to write it off as a bit of a sunstroke and working too many hours, but the flower would peek at him from behind the tree, then shoot back against the direction of the wind. The beer can forgotten, he carefully walked into the forest to investigate. Vintezeren faculatia. Plants might move, but they sure as hell don't talk. Maybe he was a foreigner dressed up in cosplay. Can you speak English? Brad offered, trying to seem non-threatening.
English.
Yeah, English, Brad said in comforting tone before rounding the tree.
English.
The plant rose to its full height, revealing a face just below the large flower that crowned its head. It was the most beautiful Terrenia he had ever seen, starting off with mauve and becoming midnight purple near the outer end of the petals, while the deep in the flower was the most radiant golden hue he had ever known. The face itself was effeminate and very comely, even though it was green. And Brad felt his pulse quicken with desire. He was smitten with the plant immediately.
I can understand a little, the Terrenia replied. I wanted a drink.
A light breeze reminded him that he was waterlogged and he was starting to get cold. The Terrenia shivered slightly as well, and Brad had an idea. I need to head home and get warmer. Would you like to come with me?
Home?
The Terrenia said.
Home is warm. Home is moist.
Brad remembered that moist wasn't a popular word in English vocabulary, but dismissed the thought. It was a talking Terrenia. Who cared what it said? Yeah, it's warm and moist, Brad cooed. My boat is right over there, and we can be home before it gets too cold. It took a minute to realize that the Terrenia was rooted, and Brad kicked himself for being stupid before offering to carry her to his boat. He lifted her roots out of the soil and positioned herself over Brad's outstretched arms while lacing 2 branches around the back of his neck. She was incredibly light for his size, and Brad hurriedly brought her back to his house. She planted herself in a large pot he had prepared for her, and he grabbed some dry clothes and headed for the shower. This is insane, he said, allowing the hot water to wash over him. It could never work. She's a plant and I'm a mammal.
Brad?
He looked up at the Terrenia, who had been able to navigate the pot into the bathroom. He blushed and covered his nakedness with his hands, but she seemed not to notice as she uprooted herself from the pot and climbed into the shower with him.
Feels so good,
she purred as the water splashed over her, and the flower atop her head seemed to blossom even more. Brad lost control of his emotions and jumped out of the shower to race naked into the greenhouse. He pulled all the flowers he remembered people bought to demonstrate their love and streaked naked back to the house to present them to her.
Brad, what are you doing with those?
I wanted to show you how much I adore you, Brad said, presenting her the flowers.
By killing other plants and presenting me with their genitalia?
The Terrenia exclaimed in shock. Brad stammered.
What is wrong with you?
The Terrenia cried out. Brad had to think and decide to put his knowledge of plants to use. They're carnations and dianthus, and you're a Terrenia, a plant that chokes out dianthus, and I wanted to show you that there is no room in my heart for any other flower other than you. The look of horror on the Terrenia was replaced with one of amusement.
You murdered them for me?
Well, now it sounds awful, Brad mumbled.
We shall choke them out or cross all worlds, reduce the dianthus to mere weeds in our glorious war,
the Terrenia stated proudly. Brad was at a loss for words.
You have won my heart, human Brad. We will wed at dawn, and conquest of all dianthus shall commence thereafter. We shall adorn our home with the desiccated corpses of their reproductive organs, the Terrenia cried out. A month had passed, and Brad was woken up early to start the coffee pot. Waiting for the pot to brew, he decided to see what was on the television and picked up the remote. Breaking news, the anchor began. The Florida man who married an alien plant has unleashed his hybrid offspring on Orlando. That's not fair. I just sent my kids to Disney World, Brad complained. Brad,
the Terrenia called sweetly from the bedroom. Brad smiled and removed the pot of rose tea, poured a cup for himself and called out, Coming, my love, before heading back to the bedroom, cup and pot in hand. The United States government is declaring a state of emergency in Florida as evacuations have increased in Georgia, Alabama, and Cuba, the anchor continued. Love makes people do crazy things, Brad said, closing the bedroom door. End of story. I'd quickly like to thank the T5 peeps, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Severin Cerberus, Bushmaster 177, Henry the Red, Caspar Arnholtz, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Elijah Silvercross, Dragzoon WRE, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.